We've picked apart the politics of the budget with Andrew Clennell. Let's now drill down to some of the detail with two of the country's biggest economic brains. From Melbourne, business columnist Terry McCrann, and from Sydney, saw him last night, former Chief Economist of the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, Dr Andrew Stone. I'll start with you first, if I can, Terry. A lot of commentary about this $8 billion cost of living spend, the halving of the petrol excise, the payment for low-income earners, money to welfare recipients. But beyond the sugar hit, the budget papers are pretty grim. We've got decades of deficits. We've got gross debt hurtling towards $1 trillion. Short-term gain, long-term pain. What do you think?
Well, Peter, I have to say that given the starting point, and I mean that politically, the hole that the government's in, I actually find the spending splash that they're doing is reasonably restrained. You say $8 billion in covering those major items, and that's spread over a couple of years. And Josh Frydenberg is also correct in saying, obviously, that it's temporary and it's targeted. So in that sense, I would sort of give him a tick. But it's a very small tick, Peter, because exactly as you say, we have locked in a huge amount of spending because of COVID. Over $100 billion it went up in the first year. And once again, the government is not hauling that spending in. And when you look out at the numbers going forward, on the most optimistic, heroic Treasury assumptions, we have, as you say, deficits and rising debt. The net debt is not projected to get to $1 trillion by 2032. I think it will. I'm interested on Andrew's comment on that. So this is not a budget that we can have confidence in terms of building a strong future.
Yeah, I don't begrudge the spend. I know people are doing it tough, particularly pensioners and fixed incomes. But what I don't like is the failure to prune. I think Andrew Clennell was shrewd at the top of the show. I mean, this idea that you do budgets right up against election campaigns means we don't get a good budget. We get an election pitch, but not a good budget. Let's go to that welfare bill, Andrew Stone, including the spending to NDIS. We're now talking about a budget bill, a welfare bill of $221 billion. That's more than a third of the total budget, 6 times what we spend on defence. That's not sustainable.
No, it isn't. And it's also, in a sense, I agree with what Terry was saying a moment ago, and you were saying that it could have been a whole lot worse with this budget. But figures like the one you just quoted about the welfare spending versus the defence spending are a measure, I think, of how this budget has missed the mark in terms of the seriousness of the situation that we face. So in terms of our defence situation, we face a much more difficult situation than we have faced in 50 years. And yet there was no urgency about defence spending, and yet we're finding tens of billions of dollars more every year to pump into welfare spending. In the same way, there wasn't a sense of urgency about the debt problems that we face and the deficit problems that we face. You've spoken about how there are deficits as far as the eye can see. Just again, to put that in perspective, we'll be recording our 14th deficit in a row this year, and we've got another 4 predicted. That makes 18 deficits in a row. Now, after the early 1990s recession, which was incredibly severe, unemployment rate got above 11%. We only had 7 years of deficits, and one of those was tiny before we got back into surplus. So this idea that we can just keep going, spending this huge amount on welfare, just spending on everything that we think of, that we'd like to do, and then just assume that we'll be right, we're going to come a real cropper.